You'll forgive an old salt like me for spinning a yarn or two, when the wind claws at the shutters and the sea churns up her ancient grudge. It's like the ghosts of every lighthouse I ever tended come knocking. I spent nigh on 40 years trimming wicks and polishing lenses along this jagged coast, from the Irish Sea to the Channel's edge. And let me tell thee, a lighthouse ain't just bricks and mortar. Each one's got a pulse, a story carved into its stones by storm and sorrow. Some tales warm the heart, others'll chill the marrow. But before I dive into the tales, let me tell ye a bit about what it meant to be a keeper. It wasn't just about lighting a lamp and waiting for dawn. Oh no, it was a life of hard graft and harder choices. You had to be jack-of-all-trades mechanic, weatherman, sometimes even doctor or rescuer. And you had to have a steady nerve, for the sea can turn on you in a heartbeat. And out there on those rocks, there's nowhere to run. But for all the hardship, there was a certain pride in it, knowing that your light was saving lives, guiding ships safely home. Being a lighthouse keeper meant living with the elements, often in remote spots where the nearest neighbor was a seabird. In the 17th century, like at the Lizard Light, you'd be hauling coal up steep stairs to feed the brazier, keeping it burning bright through gales and rain. By the 18th century, at places like Longships, you'd be dealing with oil lamps, trimming wicks, and polishing reflectors, all while the sea tried to drown out your light. Come the 19th century, at Flannan Isles, you'd be winding clockwork mechanisms for those fancy Fresnel lenses, logging every storm and praying the supply ship didn't get delayed. And always, you had to watch the weather, for a rogue wave or a sudden fog could spell disaster. Families lived in those lighthouses, you know, wives and children, all crammed into those narrow quarters, with the wind howling outside and the lights spinning above. It was a tight-knit life, but also a lonely one. Children grew up with the sea as their playground and the lighthouse as their home. Some loved it, others couldn't wait to leave for the mainland. But they all carried the light in their blood, you might say. The isolation could weigh heavy, though weeks, sometimes months, without seeing another soul, just the endless rhythm of the waves and the spinning beam. It took a special kind to stick it out, and not all did. Now, let's get to the stories. Each one's got its own flavor of history, its own slice of keeper life, and its own bit of lighthouse lore. So pull up a chair, lad. Let the fire crackle and the dram burn your throat. I'll tell thee of the lighthouses and the legends that cling to like salt to a sailor's skin. Our first story is The Pirate's Lantern from the Lizard Light, 1619. Down Cornwall Way, where the cliffs stab the sky and the folk are as hard as the granite they tread, lies the Lizard Point. It's the southernmost spit of England, a place where the Atlantic and the Channel collide in a froth of fury. In 1619, a man named Sir John Killigrew, a gentleman by title but a rogue by nature, raised the first Lizard lighthouse. A fine tower it was for its day, its coal-fired beacon cutting through the murk to guide ships past the jagged reefs. But the locals, with their sharp eyes and sharper tongues, knew better than to trust Sir John's charity. The Killigrews were a powerful clan, lords of Pendennis Castle, with a reputation for straddling the line between law and lawlessness. Cornwall in those days was a wild land, half tamed, where smuggling and wrecking were as much a trade as fishing. The Spanish Armada was a fresh memory, and England's coasts were a battleground for privateers and pirates alike. Ships laden with New World silver or Baltic furs were ripe for the picking, and the Lizard's waters were a graveyard of hulls. Word spread that Sir John's light wasn't always a saviour. On moonless nights, they said, he'd kindled a beacon to lure ships onto the manacles, those cruel rocks that'd tear a galleon's belly open like a gutted fish. When the waves had done their work, Killigrew and his band of cutthroats would descend, swift as gulls, plundering silk, gold, and casks of Madeira from the wreckage. No sailor was left to carry the tale to London. The sea swallowed their screams, and the cliffs kept their silence. Now, let me tell ye about the lighthouse itself. Back in 1619, when Sir John built that first Lizard light, it was nothing like the fine structures we have today. Just a simple tower with a great brazier atop, filled with coal, as was common for lighthouses of that era. Lizard lighthouse. The keeper's job was to keep that fire blazing bright day and night, come rain or shine. It was hard work, mind you, hauling coal up those narrow stairs, tending the fire to make sure it didn't go out or burn too low. And all the while knowing that if that light failed, ships might crash on the rocks below. But in Sir John's case, well, let's just say the light wasn't always meant to save. Keeper life back then was rough and ready. You'd be living in a cramped tower, with maybe a family or a mate to share the watch, but always on edge, especially with the likes of Killigrew scheming nearby. The coal had to be fetched from the mainland, often in rough seas, and keeping the fire going meant constant vigilance, stoking it, clearing ash, making sure the wind didn't snuff it out. It was physical labour, and not for the faint-hearted, especially when the gales came howling off the Atlantic. Was it true? The records are murky, as records often are when power and coin are involved. Sir John was a man of influence, knighted by Queen Elizabeth herself, and his family's grip on Cornwall was ironclad. But the whispers persisted, passed down in alehouses and fishing villages. Some say the Killigrew's wealth, their grand manor at Arwenack, owed more to blood than to taxes. Others claimed the light itself was cursed, its flame fed by the greed of its master. To this day, when the fog rolls thick over the Lizard, sailors swear they see a false light flickering on the cliffs, beckoning them to ruin. Greed, lad, burns brighter than any coal. The second story is about The Girl and the Bible from Longship's Lighthouse in the 18th century, off Land's End, where England's western edge crumbles into the sea. The Longship's Lighthouse stands sentinel on a cluster of rocks battered by the Atlantic's full wrath. Built in 1795, it was a marvel of its day, its granite tower defying storms that could smash a frigate to splinters. But our tale harks back to the earlier light, a humbler affair from the mid-18th century, when the Longships were a graveyard for ships bound for Bristol or the Americas. In those days, the keeper's life was a lonely one. Weeks, sometimes months, cut off from the mainland, with only the gulls and the roar of the sea for company. The keeper of the Longships, a devout man named Thomas Varon, lived there with his young daughter, Mary, barely 10 years old. It was a time of wreckers, vile folk who'd lure ships to their doom with false lights or scavenge the remains of those already lost. The Cornish coast was rife with and the law was too distant to care. One bitter night, with a gale howling and the sea clawing at the rocks, the wreckers struck. They rowed out in their black boats, silent as death, and stormed the lighthouse. They dragged Thomas away, likely to silence him for good, leaving Mary alone in the tower. The lamps were unlit, and out in the dark, merchantmen and naval sloops were at the mercy of the storm. Lives hung on the frail hope of that beacon. By the time of young Mary at Longships, they'd moved on to oil lamps, those Ogand lamps, with their clever design that gave a steadier, brighter light. Invented by a Frenchman named Ami Agand in 1780, these lamps used a hollow wick and a glass chimney to draw air through the flame, making it burn cleaner and brighter than any candle or earlier oil lamp longship's lighthouse. But even so, it took skill to keep them burning right. You had to trim the wick just so, make sure the oil was clean, and polish those reflectors till they shone like mirrors. For alas, her age, to manage all that, especially in a storm, well, it speaks volumes about her courage and her father's teaching. Keep a life at longships meant living in a round tower, 3 stories high, with water tanks and coal stores below, oil tanks and a kitchen in the middle, and a bedroom up top under the Lantern longship's lighthouse. It was cramped, but it was home, and families often shared the space, with children growing up knowing the rhythm of the light. The isolation was fierce, though relief came by boat, and in bad weather you might be cut off for weeks. The keepers worked in teams, 2 at a time, swapping shifts every month, but even then, the sea could be a cruel companion. Mary faced an impossible choice. The lighthouse's great lantern stood high, its wick beyond her reach. The only way to climb to it was to break a sacred rule, to stand upon the family Bible, the one her father read from every night, its pages worn from years of salt and prayer. To defile it was a sin, a betrayal of her father's faith. But to do nothing was to condemn countless souls to the deep. With tears streaming and her heart pounding, Mary laid the Bible on the cold stone floor. She whispered a prayer, stepped onto its leather cover, and stretched to light the lamps. Her small hands worked fast, trimming the wicks, pouring oil, striking the flint until the flame caught. That night, the longship's light burned steady, guiding ships to safety through the tempest. Dozens, maybe hundreds, owed their lives to her courage. When the storm passed, the wreckers were gone, and Thomas was found battered but alive on a nearby shore. Mary, though, carried the weight of her choice for years. Some say the light shone warmer that night, as if the sea itself honored her sacrifice. Others say the Bible, scuffed and stained, was never opened again, kept as a relic of a night when a child's bravery outshone the darkest of men. Our third story is The Vanished Keepers from Flannan Isles in 1900. Far out in the North Atlantic, where the Hebrides fray into the open sea, lie the Flannan Isles, 7 lonely rocks lashed by waves and wind. The lighthouse there, built in 1899, was a triumph of engineering, its light piercing the fog to guide ships rounding Scotland's wild northwest. But in December 1900, it became a mystery that haunts mariners to this day. The keepers were 3: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, seasoned men who knew the sea's moods better than most. Their job was simple: keep the lamp burning, log the weather, and endure the isolation. But on December 15th, a passing steamer noted the light was out, an ill omen in those treacherous waters. The relief ship, Hesperus, was delayed by storms, and it wasn't until December 26th that anyone set foot on the isle. What they found was eerie beyond reckoning. The lighthouse stood intact, its lens polished, its oil reservoirs full. The table was set with plates and a half-eaten meal, as if the men had been interrupted mid-bite. Their oilskins hung neatly on their hooks, though one coat, MacArthur's, was missing. The logbook recorded routine entries up to December 15th, noting heavy gales, but nothing amiss. Beyond that, silence. The men were gone, vanished, as if plucked from the earth. No bodies, no boat, no trace. The official report blamed a rogue wave, a monster swell that could have swept them from the cliffs while they worked. The Flannans are no stranger to such waves. The Atlantic's fury can hurl water 100 feet high. But the scene inside the tower, calm, orderly, didn't fit the chaos of a sudden disaster. Now, in 1900, at Flannan Isles, the lighthouse was a marvel of engineering. They had those Fresnel lenses, you see, invented by a Frenchman named Augustin Jean Fresnel back in 1822, which bent the light into a powerful beam, visible for miles. Flannan Isles Lighthouse. The keepers had to wind the clockwork every few hours to keep that lens turning, ensuring the light swept across the sea regular as clockwork. It was a precise job, requiring discipline and attention to detail, all while living on that godforsaken rock, with nothing but the gulls and the waves for company. The light was likely powered by oil lamps, with the keepers trimming wicks, refilling reservoirs, and cleaning the lens to keep it shining bright. Keeper life at Flannan was the epitome of isolation. The lighthouse was built on Elan Mora, the highest point, with materials hauled up 45-meter cliffs from supply boats, a feat of engineering in itself. Flannan Isles Lighthouse. The keepers lived in a small compound, with a cable-hauled railway to move provisions. But still, they were cut off for weeks at a time, relying on the relief ship for food and news. They kept detailed logs, noting weather, ship sightings, and any maintenance needed, all while watching the sea for signs of trouble. The isolation could weigh heavy, and some say it drove men to despair, though others thrived on the solitude. Theories abounded. Some whispered of madness, of men driven to despair by the endless howl of wind and wave. Others spoke of darker things, old Hebridean tales of spirits that haunt the outer isles, or the Ichwish, a water horse that lures men to their doom. A few pointed to the logbook's final entries, which mentioned strange lights in the sky and an unnatural stillness before the storm. The truth: no man's ever prized it from the sea's cold grip. The Flannan Isles mystery gripped the public imagination, inspiring poems and stories, even a Wilfred Wilson Gibson verse that captured its chill. To this day, keepers who've served there swear the tower feels wrong when the fog rolls in, as if the stones themselves remember. The sea, lad, she's a jealous mistress, and she keeps what she takes. Our fourth and final story is from the other end of Britain. The molten ingot from Eddystone Lighthouse in 1755. Off Plymouth's coast, where the English Channel churns with cross-currents, stands the Eddystone Lighthouse, a beacon on one of the most perilous reefs in Britain. The first tower, a fanciful wooden structure built by Henry Winstanley in 1698, was swept away by the Great Storm. The second, crafted by John Ruddard in 1709, was a sturdier affair, its timber frame coated in pitch to defy the waves. But in 1755, it met a fate no one could have foreseen. The keeper was Henry Hall, a man of 94, tough as the oak he tended. He'd seen decades of storms, wars, and hardship. Britain was then locked in the 7 Years' War, with French privateers prowling the channel. Lighthouses were vital, guiding naval ships and merchantmen past the Eddystone's fangs. Hall's duty was to keep the lantern burning, its candles casting a frail glow across the reef. The second Eddystone was a wooden tower, lit by candles. No oil lamps yet, mind you. Just candles, which must have been a right pain to keep lit in that salty air Eddystone Lighthouse. You had to replace them often, make sure they didn't gutter out in the wind or the damp. And sure enough, a spark from one of those candles set the whole place ablaze. On December 2nd, 1755, disaster struck. The lantern's flame, fed by a spark or an overturned candle, caught the wooden tower's innards. Fire roared through the structure, licking at the beams and melting the leaden roof. Hall, with two younger keepers, fought the blaze with buckets of seawater hauled from the rocks below. The old man climbed to the lantern room, braving smoke and heat that'd choke a lesser soul. As he battled, a wave of molten lead from the roof poured down. Some splashed his face, but a stream, scalding liquid metal, found his open mouth and seared its way down his throat. The pain must have been beyond imagining, yet Hall endured, staggering down the tower to safety. The fire raged on, consuming the lighthouse until only charred timbers remained. Hall lingered 12 days, his body racked with agony. When he died, surgeons at Plymouth performed an autopsy and found a marvel. Inside his stomach, the lead had cooled into a solid ingot, 7.5 ounces, smooth as a river stone. It's kept now in the National Museum of Scotland, a grim relic of a keeper's defiance. Keeper life at Eddystone in 1755 was basic and brutal. The wooden tower was a shipbuilder's design, more like a floating beacon than a stone fortress, and candles were the light source, requiring constant attention. Eddystone Lighthouse. The keepers lived in cramped quarters, with the sea always threatening to wash them away or, as in Hall's case, fire to consume them. Relief came by boat, and in bad weather they were cut off, facing the elements alone. It was a life of constant vigilance, with the added danger of fire in a wooden structure, as the story shows. The Eddystone was rebuilt in 1759 by John Smeaton, a stone tower that stood a century and set the standard for lighthouses worldwide. But Hall's tale lingers, a testament to the stubbornness of those who tend the lights. When the Channel storms rage, they say you can still hear his cries on the wind, mingled with the crackle of flame. There ye have it, lad, for lighthouses, for tales, each a knot in the rope of history. The sea's been telling stories since the world was young, and every tower on her shores holds a piece of M. Heroes, villains, ghosts, and mysteries, they're all there, etched in salt and stone. When the fog creeps in and the wind sings low, listen close. The lamps are still calling, their voices older than the rocks they stand on. Now, pass that bottle. I've got a few more tales to unravel before the fire dies. Many thanks for treading this tale's dark path. If its chill gripped you, like, follow, subscribe, and comment below.